Quicksand, a Byomkesh Bakshi story by Sharadindu Bandyopadhyay. We, that is Byomkesh and I, Ajit, could not ignore any longer the repeated requests of Kumar Tridib to visit his estate. So one cold December morning, we left Calcutta for a break of 7 or 8 days. Our intention was to relax completely for those days and return bright and fresh for work again to Calcutta. There was no dearth of hospitality. We spent the first day just snacking every hour and chatting non-stop with Kumar Tridib. The main topic of our discussion was, of course, Kumar Tridib's uncle, Sir Digindra, mentioned in the story, Hidden Heirloom. After dinner, Tridib ushered us to our bedroom and said, "We will go out early tomorrow morning for hunting. I have made all the arrangements." Byomkesh asked enthusiastically, "What kind of game do you find?" Tridib said, "Not tigers, but rabbits, wild boar, deer, peacocks, wild ducks. There is a large jungle at the border of my estate. The jungle belongs to Himanshu Roy, the zamindar of the adjoining estate called Chorabali, Quicksand. Himanshu is a good friend of mine. I informed him this morning about our visit, and also asked his permission to hunt in this area. I hope you don't mind." We both said together, "Mind?" Byomkesh added, "Only there are no tigers. That's disappointing." Tridib said, "I can't say there are no tigers. Every year 1 or 2 tigers do visit this area, but don't depend on it. Besides, even if a tiger is available, my friend Himanshu will bag it. He won't allow us to hunt it." He began laughing. "He has no time to look after his estate. He's so addicted to hunting. He spends most of his time either in the room where he keeps his guns, or he's roaming around in the forest. He's crazy about hunting. His aim is also remarkable. He can shoot a tiger standing on the ground." Byomkesh said curiously, "What did you say was the name of the estate?" "Chorabali." "Strange name." "Yes. We have heard that there is a patch of quicksand somewhere in the jungle, but no one knows exactly where it is. That is why the strange name was given." He looked at his watch and said, "You'd better go to bed, or you'll not be able to wake up early." He smothered a yawn and left. We were given one large room with 2 beds. We snuggled under comfortable, soft and warm quilts and prepared for a good night's sleep. Soon we were fast asleep. Suddenly I found myself drowning in quicksand. Byomkesh was standing at the edge of the quicksand, watching me and laughing. Soon I was neck deep in sand and was gradually getting suffocated. For a moment I got the taste of a terrible death. I woke up, sweating profusely. The quilt had covered my nose, hence the feeling of suffocation. I sat up on my bed for some time, thinking amusedly how our thought process could strangely filter into our sleep. Very early in the morning there was a big rush to go out for hunting. We wore shorts and warm hoses, breakfasted on hot scalding tea and cakes, and climbed into the vehicles. The car was loaded with 3 shotguns, lots of bullets, and a huge basket of foodstuff. Tridib, Byomkesh, and I piled onto the back seat of the car, and the car started at once. We sped through a cold, misty dawn. Kumar mumbled through his raised overcoat collar, "If we don't reach before sunrise, it will be difficult to get peacocks and woodcocks. At this time, they sit on the branches of trees and are very good targets." Soon dawn broke. There were rich fields on either side of the road. Some corn sheaves were standing, while others had been cut and kept in bundles. We could see a dark green shadow in the horizon. Kumar pointed to it and said, "That is where we are going to hunt." After about 20 minutes, our car reached the edge of the forest. We got down enthusiastically with loaded guns. Kumar Tridib went to one side. Byomkesh and I walked to the other side of the forest. This was the first time that I was going to use a gun, so I was nervous to venture out alone. Tridib and we decided before parting that we would meet at an open space on the eastern edge of the forest at about 9 a.m., when we would have our breakfast. It was a huge forest. A variety of tall trees covered the sky. The sunlight filtered through their leaves. There was a huge amount of game available: deer, rabbits, birds of many kinds. I cannot express the great excitement which we felt when we pulled the trigger and found birds dropping dead at our feet. I could write an epic on it, but I don't want to be the laughingstock of veteran tiger hunters. I considered myself to be equal to the legendary Arjun in aim, but Byomkesh had only used his gun twice and killed a rabbit and a peacock. He was looking for larger game, like deer, boar, or even a tiger. But as the sun rose, the fresh forest air stoked our appetites. So we began walking towards the eastern edge of the forest. We found that Kumar Tridib was also walking towards the open space. We reached the clear space. In front of it was a large sandy patch, shaped like a half-moon. It was about 1/4 of a mile in width, but we could not make out how long it was. It bordered the forest. The sunlight shone on the sand. It was a beautiful sight. This area prevented the forest from expanding eastwards. Maybe many years ago it had been a huge river. Now, with natural calamities and changes, it had become a dry, sandy area. We sat at the edge of this huge stretch of sand and lit our cigarettes. Soon Kumar Tridib joined us. "I'm feeling very hungry. There Duryodhan has laid out our breakfast. Let's go." We noticed that Tridib's cook was laying the food on a white sheet under a tree. We reached the spot quickly. We began talking about our hunting spree. I was chastened to find that Kumar Tridib had won hands down. We had our fill and gulped down hot tea from a flask. Sated, we lit cigarettes and began smoking. Tridib relaxed against a tree and said, "This stretch of sand is responsible for the name of this estate. This side of the sandy area belongs to Himanshu. My area begins from the opposite edge." Byomkesh said, "How long is the stretch of sand? Does it encircle the whole forest?" "No. It is about 3 miles long. Then my fields start. In between this stretch is an area of quicksand, but no one knows exactly where it is. No one walks over the sand for fear that they may be sucked in. Strangely, even cows, foxes, and dogs avoid walking on the sandy stretch." Byomkesh asked, "Is there any water in this sandy area?" Kumar shook his head uncertainly. "I don't know. I've heard that there is water over some area on that side, but it is not always available." He pointed towards the southern stretch, which curved and vanished into the forest. Just at that time, there was a gunshot very close to us in the forest. We sat up, startled. All 3 of us were there with our guns. Then who was shooting? Suddenly, a person with a gun in one hand and a dead rabbit in the other came out of the forest. He was wearing jodhpuris and a Boy Scout cap, and a line of bullets hung from the broad belt of his breeches. Kumar Tridib laughed aloud. "Hello, Himanshu. Please join us." Himanshu Babu joined us. He said, "I should have been the one to welcome you, especially these new guests of yours." Tridib introduced us and then gently mocked him. "So, you could not resist the temptation of a hunting expedition, could you? Or were you afraid that we might bag all your tigers?" Himanshu Babu said, "I'm in great trouble. I was supposed to leave for Tripura today on an invitation for a hunting expedition, but I could not go. Divanji stopped me from going. He belongs to the time of my father, So he stops me from going hunting on any excuse. I can't even disregard his wishes. So I got out early this morning to show my ire. I can hunt a wild boar or two at least. Tridib teased him. Poor you! What a fall! A wild boar or two in place of tigers of Tripura? But why couldn't you go? Himanshu pulled the basket of food towards himself, and took out a cutlet and a couple of boiled eggs, and bit into the food happily. I began observing him. He was about our age, and strongly built. A ferocious moustache has made his gentle face unnecessarily hard. He had the sharp and alert eyes of a hunter. At a first glance he looked cruel and hard, but seeing him now, at his relaxed best, I felt his external appearance was not the only clue to his nature. He was a simple, unsophisticated person, uncomplicated, and a little disinterested and absent-minded about materialistic things, like the running of an estate. While sipping a cup of tea, Himanshu said, "What did you say? Why couldn't I go to Tripura?" "For a useless reason. But Devanji is very worried, and even the police have been informed. So I have to be stuck here for who knows how many days now." His voice was full of impatient irritation. "What has happened?" "What else? You know that after my father's death there have been court cases with the tenants of my estate for the last 5 years. The tenants were not paying their rents regularly, so there is constant unrest in the estate, constant consultation with lawyers. You know all that. In the meantime, another problem has cropped up. A few months back I had appointed a house tutor for my daughter, Baby. He vanished day before yesterday. It seems he has even taken a few account books with him. That is why there is a great uproar in my house. Devanji feels that it is a great plot hatched by the troublesome tenants of the estate." Byomkesh said, "Has the tutor not been found?" Sadly, Himanshu shook his head. "No, and until he is found—" Suddenly his face lit up. He looked at Byomkesh and said, "Great God, I had forgotten that you are a famous detective." Here, interrupting him softly, Byomkesh said, "Truth seeker. It is your job to catch thieves and robbers. Please help us to find the tutor within 2 or 3 days. Then I can still join the hunting expedition in Tripura. If I can go by tomorrow or the day after—" We laughed aloud. Kumar Tridib said, "Can you think of nothing but hunting?" Byomkesh said, "I don't have to do anything. The police will catch him. It is difficult to vanish totally from a small place like this. It is not a big city like Calcutta." Himanshu shook his head. "No, the police can do nothing. They have tried their best in the last 3 days. They have appointed people to watch out in all the railway stations nearby. But nothing has come out of their efforts so far. Please, Byomkesh Babu, I request you to take up the case. It is a small matter. You won't even take 2 hours to solve it." Byomkesh smiled at his eagerness and said, "Relate the whole incident to me in detail." Himanshu said, "Do you think I know the details? I hadn't even met him for 3 days before he vanished. Anyway, I'm telling you the little I know. A few days back, maybe about 2 months ago, an eccentric young man came to meet me one morning. I had never seen him before. He was not from this area. He was wearing a torn kurta and a torn pair of slippers. He was thin and short, and looked as if he had not eaten for a few days. But when he spoke, I realized that he was educated. He asked me to give him a job. He was in dire straits of poverty. I asked him, 'What job can you do?' He pulled out his BSc degree certificate from his pocket and said, 'I'll do whatever you ask me to do.' I felt a bit sorry for the young chap. What work could I give him? There was no vacancy in the office of my estate. Suddenly, I remembered that my wife had asked me for a private tutor for a baby. She is 7 years old, so we would have to pay a little more attention to her studies. Thus he was appointed as a tutor for baby. I found out that though he was poor, he was educated and came from a good background. I made arrangements for him to stay in a room in the outhouse. The fellow wept with gratitude. Who would have thought at the time? Name? As far as I can remember, his name was Harinath Chaudhary. Anyway, he stayed in the house, but I hardly met him. I heard that he was teaching baby in the morning and in the evening. Suddenly, the other day, I heard that the boy had vanished without telling anyone. I didn't mind his vanishing at all. But then I heard that he had vanished with a few account books. But because he took them with him, all my plans have been shattered. Now I won't be released from this place until he is found. Himanshu stopped speaking. Byomkesh was lying on the grass while listening. He asked, "Where did he have his meals?" Himanshu said, "He used to eat in the house. My wife used to give him special attention as he was baby's tutor." Suddenly we heard a flapping sound on the trees. We looked up to see a huge woodcock flying from one branch of a tree to another. The gap between the two trees was about 30 feet. In a minute, Himanshu fired from his gun. The bird could not reach the other tree, but dropped dead midway in its flight. I exclaimed, "What a crack shot you are!" Byomkesh also said, "Really remarkable." Kumar Tridib said, "This is nothing. He can do much more than this. Himanshu, show them your great trick of hitting the target only by hearing the sound." "No, no. Let's go into the forest again for another hunting spree." "No. You have to show us your special talent. Tie a hanky over your eyes." Himanshu was embarrassed. "Just look at him. It's a silly trick. You must have seen it so many times." We too began insisting. "You have to show us." All right, all right. It is nothing but hitting a target merely by listening to the sound. Byomkesh Babu, tie my eyes so that I'm unable to see, but keep my ears free so that I can hear." Byomkesh tied his eyes securely. Then Kumar Tridib took a cup and tied a string to its handle. He tiptoed to a tree 25 feet away and tied the cup to a branch. Byomkesh said, "Now listen, Himanshu Babu." Tridib made a small sound with a spoon on the hanging cup. Himanshu turned the way from which the sound had come and said, "Please make the sound once more." Kumar Tridib repeated the sound and quickly walked away. Before the echo of the sound could die down completely, we heard the bullet before being fired. We looked around to find that only the handle of the cup was hanging from the tree. The pieces of the rest of the cup were lying around. We were astounded. Himanshu untied the hanky and said, "Are you happy?" He was a little embarrassed with all our praises. Indeed, it seemed like magic to us. He said, "Please stop. I'm blushing. Get up. Let us go into the forest again." At about 1:30 in the afternoon, we returned to where our car was parked. In the meantime, the incident of Harinath's theft of the account books was forgotten. Himanshu did not show much interest now about Byomkesh taking up the case. Maybe he thought that the police would be able to solve such a simple case. But it was Byomkesh who broached the subject again. "We couldn't hear the entire story about your Harinath tutor." Himanshu said, "I have told you everything I know. I don't think there is much more to tell you." Byomkesh did not say anything more. Tridib said, "Himanshu, get into our car. We'll drop you home. You must have walked to the forest in the morning?" "Yes, I crossed the field. It is much longer if I walk along the road," Tridib said. "It is about 2 miles along the road. Come, you will drop you home. And if you ask us to stay for lunch, we will be very happy," he teased. We did not mind going anywhere since we had come for a holiday. We were ready to humor our host. Himanshu said, Of course. You are my guests. I should have thought about it earlier. I'm sorry for my omission. Anyway, you can rest in my house after lunch and then return home after tea in the evening." Byomkesh said, "And if possible, try to find out where your tutor has run away." "Yes, that's a good idea. My Divan may be able to give you much more information about him." We got into the car. Although Himanshu had invited us to his house very cordially, I don't know why I felt that he was not too happy to take us all to his house. After about 10 minutes, our car entered the huge compound of his palatial house. At the sound of the car, an elderly person came out onto the veranda, and as soon as he saw Himanshu, he said in a distressed tone, "Himanshu, my worst fears have come true. Harinath not only stole the account books, but also 6,000 rupees from the cash box." It was 3 in the afternoon. The mild winter sun was giving way to evening. "I would like to hear everything from your Divan, Bhattacharji Babu," Byomkesh said, while reclining on some cushions. We were relaxing together after a heavy lunch. Sitting next to Byomkesh, little baby was dressing up her doll. The two had become very good friends in these 2 hours. Divan Kaligati Bhattacharji sat straight in a yogic asana. It looked as if he would start meditating if he got the slightest chance. One could associate only prayers and meditation with a man like Kaligati. In fact, I mistook him at first for the family priest. He looked like an ascetic. He was lean and thin and very fair. He had a red tikka on his forehead and wore a string of rudraksha round his neck. But it was he who was managing the huge property of this hunting-obsessed, impractical zamindar. Kaligati was managing every little detail of this household, from entertaining guests to money matters of the estate. Everything was running with clockwork precision because of him. He stirred when Byomkesh spoke. He closed his eyes for some time, then said slowly, "Harinath was such an ordinary and insignificant human being that when one starts talking about him, it seems that there is nothing to say. He looked simple, but that he was so wicked seems unimaginable. I am a good judge of character, but this boy hoodwinked even me. I never suspected that this was his disguise. He had come here with other intentions. The first day he came here he looked so poverty-stricken that I gave him 2 dhotis, 2 vests, 2 kurtas, and 2 blankets from the storeroom. Himanshu had already given him a room to stay. There were old account books on the shelves of that room. Otherwise, it was not used. We moved a bed into that room. It was decided that baby would study there in the morning and in the afternoon. I had decided that he would have his food with some other workers, like Anadi Sharkar, in their house. I was about to make these arrangements, when baby's mother requested me to make arrangements for him in the house itself. So that was done. Then he began teaching baby regularly. I noticed that he taught well. He used to sit with me sometimes and listen to the scriptures. In this way, 2 months went by. Last Saturday, I went home just after evening. You must have seen the house I stay in, the yellow house on the right side as you enter the gate. I had sent my wife to my village a few months back, so I stay alone and I cook my own food. I don't mind it at all. I do a special puja on Saturday night, so I went home quickly to prepare for it. It was very late in the night when I finished my puja. The next morning, I heard that Harinath could not be found. Soon it was 12 noon. Still there was no sign of the man. I became suspicious. I went into his room and found that he had not slept on his bed the previous night. Then I opened the cupboard where the accounts books are kept. The books of the last 4 years were missing. For the last 4 years, we have been fighting court cases with many of our important tenants. I felt that it must be their plot. Harinath must have been their spy. He came disguised as a tutor to steal these account books. I informed the police. I did not know till then that 6,000 rupees were missing from the locker. Divanji stopped for some time and then said hesitantly, "For various reasons there was a dearth of money in our estate for the past few years. There were the expenses for the court cases too. So we had borrowed 6,000 rupees from the moneylenders to tide over these problems. I had kept the money in the locker tied in a piece of cloth. It was in one corner of the locker. I have often opened the locker, but never thought of opening the bundle of cloth to check the money. Today, the lawyer asked for money, so when I unfolded the cloth, I got some old newspapers instead of the money." The divan was silent. Byomkesh was lying on his back, staring at the ceiling. He said, "Was the lock on the box secure? Who has the keys to the locker?" Divan said, "The locker has 2 keys. One is with me and the other is with Himanshu. I have my key, but Himanshu has misplaced his, and it could not be traced for the last few days." Himanshu said with a guilty expression, "It is my fault. I can never look after my keys. I always forget where I have kept them. This time, too, I could not find the keys for the last few days. I was not too worried. I thought I would get them somewhere, someday, as always." Byomkesh sat up and pulled baby on his lap. "Our baby's teacher was a great one, but it's strange that he can't be found. Are efforts being made to find him?" Divan Kaligati said, "We are trying our best. Police are doing their work. Moreover, I too have appointed some people. But we have yet got no news of the man." Baby threw away her doll and hugged Byomkesh. "When will my teacher come back?" Byomkesh shook his head. "I don't know, dear. Maybe never." Baby began crying. Byomkesh asked, "Did you like your teacher?" Baby nodded her head. "Yes, I love him very much. He taught me arithmetic. Tell me, 9 sevens are how much?" Byomkesh said, "I don't know. 64?" Baby laughed. "You don't know anything. 63. Do you know how to chant the hymn to Goddess Kali?" Byomkesh said helplessly, "No, my dear, I don't even know that." Baby began chanting the hymn, when Kaligati stopped her with a smile and sent her outside to play. After she left, he said, "He was a good teacher." Byomkesh stood up. "Let's go and see the room in which he stayed." The room was at the end of a long veranda. The door was locked. Divanji opened the lock with a key from a bunch tucked in his waist. We entered the room. The room was small in size. There were 2 wooden cupboards, a table, chairs, and a bed inside. which left hardly any space to move. Opposite the door was a small window. Byomkesh pushed it open. Then he looked around the room. The bedclothes on the bed were neatly folded. The table was covered with a fine layer of dust. In one corner of the room, some clothes were hanging from a clothesline. The door of a cupboard was ajar. There was a picture of goddess Kali on the wall, showing the teacher's special reverence for this deity. Byomkesh bent down and pulled out a pair of shoes from under the bed and said, "This shoe is a new one. You must have bought it for him." Kaligati said, "Yes." "Strange, strange." Byomkesh kept the shoes and went up to the clothes. He lifted the washed and the unwashed clothes and said, "Strange, very strange." Himanshu asked curiously, "What has happened?" Byomkesh was about to reply, then his eyes fell on a small shelf on the opposite side. He went towards it quickly and, pulling out something, asked in surprise, "Did the tutor wear spectacles?" Kaligati said, "I forgot to tell you about that. Yes. Has he left his glasses behind?" Byomkesh looked through the glasses, handed them to me, and said, "Isn't it strange?" Kaligati frowned thoughtfully. "It is really strange, because a person who has bad eyesight would never leave his glasses behind. What do you think is the reason?" Byomkesh said, "There may be many reasons. He may have been cheating you. He may not have had poor eyesight at all." In the meantime, Kumar Tridib and I were trying to look through the glasses. The glasses were heavy, set on a rickety frame. One could see nothing through the spectacles. Kumar Tridib said, "Byomkesh Babu, I don't think your assumption is correct. The spectacles are worn out with use, and they are powerful glasses." Byomkesh said, "I may be wrong, but the tutor may have brought someone else's old spectacles to deceive everyone. That may also be a possibility. Anyway, let us look at the cupboard." We found rows of account books on the shelves. There were about 50 to 60 such books. Byomkesh took one out and said, "It is quite heavy, at least 6 kilos. Does each book have a year's account?" Kaligati said, "Yes." Byomkesh turned the pages and saw that it was an account of the past year, which was the 5th. The most recent ones of the last 4 years were stolen. Byomkesh pulled out a few more and glanced through the system of accounting. Each book was divided into 2 parts. One portion was the rough accounts, and the other portion was the fair, permanent one. On one side, the daily income and expenditure had been noted. On the other side, there was the total daily expense. This was not the way accounts were kept in estates, but this system was convenient because one could make out expense and income, rough and fair accounts, at one glance. Byomkesh had taken the matter very lightly in the beginning. He considered it to be an unusual case of theft, but after examining the room, I noticed there came that strange, sharp look in his eyes. I knew that look. He had stumbled onto something serious. It was not a matter to be taken lightly. I, too, became excited. While coming out of the room, Byomkesh asked Himanshu, "Do you want me to investigate the case?" Himanshu hesitated for a moment, then said, "Of course. So much of money is involved. The mystery has to be solved." Byomkesh said, "Then the 2 of us must stay here." Himanshu said, of course, that is no problem at all." Byomkesh looked at Kumar Tridib. "If only Kumar gives his consent, can we stay here, because we are his guests?" Kumar was in 2 minds. He must have thought that Byomkesh wanted to earn some money by solving the case. So he said, "If it helps my friend Himanshu to have you here, then—" Byomkesh shook his head. "I can't promise that. I may not be able to do anything. Himanshu Babu, if you are not interested, then tell us frankly. We have come here to have a holiday in Kumar's estate, and left our profession behind in Calcutta. So if you don't require our help, we won't be unhappy." Kumar realized that Byomkesh had been able to read his mind. So he insisted, "No, no, you stay here and solve the case. I'll come every day to visit you." Himanshu nodded in agreement. So we decided to stay back in Chorabali estate. We went back to the sitting room and had our afternoon tea in silence. The Kumar said, "It is 4:30. Himanshu, I'll leave now. I'll come sometime tomorrow." He stood up to leave. We saw Kumar off to his car. He had made plans for us, fishing, boat rides, and so on. So he was a little disappointed. He asked us, "How long do you think this case will take you?" Byomkesh said, "I really can't say. You must be thinking how ungrateful I am. But, Kumar, the matter here is serious. I should not neglect it." Kumar looked startled. "Really? I had thought it was not so serious. Of course, a lot of money has been stolen. The theft of the money is of secondary importance." "Then?" Byomkesh was quiet for some time. Then he said in a grave voice, "I think Harinath is not alive." We were both startled. Kumar said, "What are you saying?" Byomkesh said, "I think so. I hope you will forgive me after hearing this." Kumar said anxiously, "There is no question of forgiving you. If a man has been murdered, it is our duty to find out the culprit." Byomkesh said, "I'm not saying that he has been murdered, but he is not alive. Anyway, we cannot talk about it unless we get more proof. Please come tomorrow and bring our suitcases with you. You had better go. You will be late reaching home." We started walking towards the house after Kumar had left. It was quite a distance between the gate and the house. There were many plants in the beautiful garden. There were benches to sit and relax. We left the small house belonging to the divan to the right and walked ahead. It was a dark winter evening. Only a red streak of sunlight could be seen in the west above the heads of the trees in the forest. Byomkesh was walking slowly with a worried expression. I could not fathom his thoughts. What did he see in the room that made him so sure of Harinath's death? I was a bit absent-minded while thinking of all this. A very serious event has occurred in this small, quiet place to upset the calm life of the people here. One can never understand the existence of a whirlpool by seeing its calm surface. Having been present with Byomkesh in many of his cases, I had realized that it was difficult to make out a person's character by looking at his exterior. So also it was difficult to gauge a situation by merely judging it superficially. Byomkesh lit a cigarette standing under an eucalyptus tree. Then he said to himself, "The only reason for Harinath not to wear his shoes could be that shoes make a noise. But why should he not wear his kurta? Why would he leave his spectacles behind?" I said, "But how do you know about his kurta?" Byomkesh said, "At the Divan's order, he was given 2 kurtas, 2 vests from the store. He himself had brought a torn kameez. All of them were hung on the line." I was quiet for some time. Then I said, "So you surmise that—" Byomkesh was looking at the sky. A small curved moon could be seen on the western sky. He pointed to it and said, "Ajit, have a look. The moon is still very small. What was it like that night?" I shook my head to express my ignorance. Byomkesh said, "It must have been a new moon night, a very dark night. Let's consult the almanac." I heard a new excitement in his voice. I had always thought that poets and romantics were excited by the moon, so I was a bit surprised at Byomkesh's enthusiasm, as I knew him to be the most unromantic and most unpoetic. But by now I was getting used to his unpredictable behavior, so I followed him to the house silently. The part of the garden which we had reached was about 50 yards from the house. If we walked straight, we would have to cross a small grove of pine trees. The grove separated this part of the garden from the rest of it. We walked silently on the grass and reached this grove, when we heard someone sobbing. We slowed down our pace automatically. I looked at Byomkesh. He had put a finger on his lips to ask me to keep quiet. We heard a voice through the sobs. "Babu, this Anadi Sarkar has seen you grow up from a little child. Have mercy on your old servant. The mistress has misunderstood. My daughter has made a mistake, but I can vow that we did not commit that terrible sin." There was no sound for some time. Then we heard Himanshu's harsh, low voice. "Are you telling the truth? You haven't killed?" "Master, I promise you, we did not. If I'm lying to you, my employer, then let God never forgive me." Again there was no response for some time. Then Himanshu said, "But you can't keep Radha here any more. You send her away tomorrow. Make the arrangements. If people get to know about this incident, then I will not be able to show you any mercy. As it is, there is a lot of problems in the house." Anadi said anxiously, "I will send her to Benares tomorrow. An aunt of hers stays there." "All right. If you can't bear the expenses—" Byomkesh pulled me by the hand. We tiptoed away from the place. After about 15 minutes, we reached the house by a different, roundabout way. Kaligati was standing on the veranda, talking to a servant. Baby was pulling at his hand and asking him to do something for her. We heard part of what she was saying. "Why don't you call out only once?" Kaligati said in an embarrassed manner, "You crazy girl, not now." Baby pleaded, "Please, Diwan Dada, they will also hear." She pointed towards us. Kaligati came forward to meet us. He dismissed the servant and asked us in a serene voice, "Were you strolling in the garden?" Byomkesh said, "Yes. What is Baby saying? Who does she want you to call?" Kaligati said with a helpless smile, "This girl is the limit. She wants me to imitate the call of a fox now." Surprised, I said, "What is that?" Kaligati turned to Baby and said, "I'm busy now. Don't disturb me. Go to your mother and sit down to study." But Baby was insistent. She held on to his finger and said, "Only once, Dada." Kaligati whispered something into her ears and then said loudly, "Just before you go to sleep, I will call for you, all right? Now, my dear, please go away." "All right." After Baby left, Kaligati told us, "My man has come back from the police station. There is no trace of Harinath." Byomkesh said, "Oh, tell me, is there any servant called Anadi?" "Yes, Anadi is the head servant of the estate." Kaligati looked curious. Byomkesh thought for some time. "I don't think I've seen him." Does he stay in the servants' quarters? Kaligati said, No, he is a very old servant. Before the house, near the stables, there are a few rooms. He stays there. Is he alone? No, he has a wife and a widowed daughter. His daughter has been ill for the last few days. I had asked him to take her to the doctor, but he is not agreeing. He says she will be all right. Why are you asking all this? No, nothing in particular. I wanted to know which employees stay nearby. Do the other servants stay outside the compound? Yes, there are 7 or 8 living quarters for them. It takes long for them to come back to work from the town. So, my master, Himanshu's father, made this arrangement. How far is the town from here? About 5 miles. The road in front goes straight east to the town. Just then, Himanshu came out of the house. He said, smiling at us, Come, Byomkesh and Ajit Babu, let me show you my armory. We followed him eagerly. It was evening. Devanji went off quickly to prepare for his evening prayers. Himanshu took us to a middle-sized room. On a table at the center of the room, a light shone. We noticed that the floor was covered with the skins of tigers, bears, and deer. There were some almirahs on the wall. Himanshu opened them one by one and showed us different types of guns, pistols, revolvers, and rifles. We were a little surprised to see this man's great affection for all those terrible weapons. He described the quality of each, and even recalled which was used to kill what animal. He said that he never allowed anyone to touch these. He cleaned and oiled them himself. After seeing the arms, we sat there in the room and started chatting. We talked about many subjects. People reveal their characters in different ways, in different environments. The perplexed atmosphere of the room helped Himanshu to unravel himself. I was quite certain that this man was a simple person, and that his mind went in a straight direction like the bullet of his gun. We unwittingly began talking about estates and the problems in managing these. Himanshu told us a lot about himself and about the estate he ran. He told us frankly that he was bitter about the constant clash with his subjects. The earnings were virtually nil. Court cases were costly. So in the last few years the debts were running into lakhs. I noticed that this bitterness had made him turn away from property matters. He was not very sure of the impending dangers because he was inexperienced about money matters. But he was vaguely aware of some unknown catastrophe in the near future. To divert his mind from this fear, he plunged himself into his favorite sport, hunting. Such was the present situation. It was 8:30 in the evening. We were called for dinner. Now we saw Anadi Sarkar. He had come to call us. His eyes had a restive and anxious expression, as if he was afraid of being caught for a misdeed. Byomkesh observed him with sharp eyes. Then we followed him to the dining room. After dinner, we were escorted to our room by Bhuvan, Himanshu's personal bearer. We relaxed on chairs and lit cigarettes. Bhuvan put up the mosquito curtains, placed a jug of water on the table, and was about to leave when Byomkesh asked, "You have seen Harinath for the last few months. Did he always wear his spectacles?" Bhuvan probably knew that we had come to investigate the theft, so he was very eager to speak. "Yes, sir. He wore it all the time. One day he was going for his bath without it, and he tripped and fell. He could not walk a step without his glasses." Byomkesh said, "How many pairs of shoes did he have?" Bhuvan smiled and said, "How many? Only one, sir. That also the master had given him. The one which he had worn to this house was so torn that even a dog would not chew it. We threw away that pair into the dustbin the very day. Really? Did he bring the picture of Goddess Kali with him? No, sir. He did not bring even a toothpick with him. He brought that picture from Divanji and hung it on the wall. Byomkesh said, "All right, thank you." Bhuvan said, "Do you want anything else, sir?" "No, but can you bring me an almanac?" Bhuvan was surprised. "Do you want it now, sir?" "Yes, if it is possible." "I will bring one, sir." We were smoking silently while waiting for Bhuvan to return, when suddenly, very close by, foxes began howling continuously. Probably 5 or 6 foxes had collected together nearby. We got over our initial shock. Bhuvan returned with the almanac. I said, "Are foxes allowed to come so close to the house?" Bhuvan controlled his smile and said, "Those are not real foxes. Baby Didi was insisting that Divanji should imitate the call of foxes. He is making that sound." I remembered. Yes, yes, Baby was asking Divanji this evening. This is a great talent. It is difficult to make out that it is false. Bhuvan said, "Yes, sir. Divanji can imitate the calls of all the animals very well." He kept the almanac on the table next to Byomkesh. I glanced at Byomkesh and found him sitting motionless like a statue. His eyes were staring fixedly. His muscles were taut. I asked in surprise, "What's the matter?" Byomkesh woke up from his trance and said, "Nothing. So this is the almanac. All right, Bhuvan, you may go now." Then Byomkesh began turning the pages of the book and stopped at a certain page. He pushed the book towards me and said, "Look at this." His voice was trembling with excitement. I looked at the page to find out that the night Harinath vanished had been a new moon night. We got up at 7 the next morning and found that the whole house was asleep. We learned from a servant who was sweeping the veranda that no one stirred before 8:30 on a winter morning. How were we to spend this hour and a half? The sun was not out properly. There was a hint of a mist. I was restless. I told Byomkesh, "Let's go out into the forest and shoot a few birds. We have nothing to do now. We'll come back by the time these people get up." I had just learned to shoot, so I was very enthusiastic. Moreover, Kumar had left the 2 guns we had used yesterday in this house. Some bullets were also left in the pockets of our coats. Byomkesh thought for some time and said, "Let's go." We started out with the guns on our shoulders. We asked the servant which road we should follow. He said that if we followed the straight road, we could walk by the side of the stretch of sand and enter the forest. We began walking. After walking for some time, we could see the trees of the forest about a mile away. By the side of the forest was the stretch of sand. From far it looked like a canal bordering the end of the forest. The direction in which we were walking was the southern part of the stretch of the sand. It had tapered off at the southern tip to meet the forest, so there was no more sand in the southern direction. After walking for about 15 minutes, we reached that southern tip. We found that there was kind of embankment there. This was about 15 feet in width. On one side of the embankment was the stretch of sand, and on the other was the green field. We climbed onto the embankment and looked down to see that there was a faint line of grass, after which began the sea of sand. I wondered where in this sea would be that terrible area of quicksand. The first thing we noticed when we climbed onto the embankment was a small, dilapidated hut. It was situated at the extreme limit of the embankment, from where the area of sand began. The roof was low. The walls were made of burnt mud, but much of the wall had broken off in portions. The thatched roof, too, was broken. Probably no one had lived there for the last 4 or 5 years. We were surprised to find that hut in such a lonely place, so far from human habitation, and so near the forest. Byomkesh said, "Let's explore the inside of the hut." I was just getting ready to follow Byomkesh when I saw a flight of wild doves in the sky. Byomkesh quickly fired a shot, and one bird fell on the sandy stretch just below us. I was getting ready to climb down the embankment to retrieve it, when Byomkesh said laughingly, "Why are you so impatient? A dead bird won't fly away. Let's first explore the hut." We entered the hut and found that it had 2 entrances. The one through which we entered had no door, but the door at the back of the hut, which opened on the stretch of sand, was still intact. There was nothing usable in the room. There was an overgrowth of grass on the mud floor. Some parts of the broken roof also crowded the room. It was a longish room, but the width was about 6 feet. Byomkesh keenly observed the floor and said, "Someone had come here recently. See, Ajit, the grass and the broken thatch is pressed down here. Someone has pulled something across the floor here. People frequent this hut, I'm sure." I did not think it was impossible. Shepherd boys would definitely come in here for a rest when they came with their flock. So I said absently, "Maybe." My mind was on the dead bird on the sand. I opened the back door of the hut to look out for the bird, but saw nothing. I was sure it had fallen there. I called Byomkesh. "Where is the bird? Your dead bird has really flown away." Byomkesh too came out of the back door and said, "Strange. Maybe it has fallen just a little ahead. We can't see it from here. Let me get down from this embankment." I got ready to climb down and step in on the sand, when Byomkesh pulled me back by the collar of my coat. "Stop it!" "What happened?" I said, surprised by the expression on his face. "Don't step onto the sand." He threw the empty cover of the bullet about 20 feet out onto the sand. My hair stood on end with fright at what I saw next. The cover stood up on its edge and was sucked into the sand until there was no trace of it anywhere. So this was the quicksand. I was about to step into it. I started trembling with nervous reaction. I looked at Byomkesh with gratitude and said, "If it was not for you, brother." But Byomkesh was not listening to me at all. He kept on saying in a whisper, "How terrible! How terrible!" Then he broke a few pieces of wood from the roof and threw them on the sand. Each of these disappeared. We could not make out the area of the quicksand. However far we might throw, the pieces kept disappearing. We came into the hut again through the back door. Byomkesh said, "Ajit, don't tell anyone that we have found the area of the quicksand. Do you understand?" We came out of the front door of the hut, and Byomkesh turned round to have a look at it. "Have you observed the position of the hut? Behind it is the quicksand. In front of it is the forest. On either side is the embankment. I would like to know who had it made." The mist had cleared. I looked in front to see a person in shorts with a gun on his shoulder striding out of the forest towards us. It was Himanshu. He said, "Where were you? I was looking for you inside the forest." Byomkesh said to me in an undertone, "Ajit, don't say a word about the quicksand." Raising his voice, he said, "Ajit forced me to come out to shoot birds, but the birds are safe. Ajit has become crazy. He will soon be arrested by the police under the Arms Act." Himanshu came to us and asked, "So did you get something?" "Nothing. But why have you come out early in the morning with your rifle?" Byomkesh asked. Himanshu said, "I heard this morning that a tiger's roar has been heard in the forest, so I quickly came out. The servant said that you had also gone towards the forest. So I was worried. If you are confronted with a tiger, your small gun would be useless." Byomkesh asked, "Who told you that there was a tiger in the forest?" "No one is certain, but my milkman was saying that the cows were restless the whole night. Probably they have smelt a tiger. Then Devanji told me that he had heard something like a tiger roar from the forest. Anyway, let's go back and have tea." Byomkesh looked at his watch and said, 8:30. Let's go. "Tell me, to whom does this small hut belong? And why was it built in this lonely spot? Do you know?" Himanshu said, as we walked towards the house, "About 4 or 5 years back, after my father's death, a sadhu who was a worshipper of goddess Kali appeared in my house. He looked terrible. He was tall and big. His face was covered with a big beard. He had a head full of long hair. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked at me and told me that he wanted to be my guest. I don't like all this, and have no respect for this kind of sadhus, so I was ready to turn him out. But Devanji prevented me from doing so. He himself is a worshipper of Kali, so probably his heart flowed with reverence for this man. He began pleading with me to keep that man as my guest, to avoid being cursed, but I refused. Finally, we came to an agreement. He would stay somewhere in the estate in a hut which would be made for him, while his food would be sent regularly from the house. I had to agree to this, because Devanji was so enthusiastic. The sadhu chose this spot, and his hut was made here. He was here for about 6 months. I did not meet him any more, but Devanji used to visit him regularly. He was even initiated by the sadhu. Devanji was always a Kali worshipper, but now he became very devout. Anyway, the sadhu vanished one day as suddenly as he had come, but the hut remained. By this time we had reached the house. We had our breakfast in the large open veranda. As we were enjoying a sumptuous breakfast, Kumar Tridib arrived with our suitcases. He asked Byomkesh, "How far?" Byomkesh shook his head uncertainly. "Not very far, but I am expecting to find a solution in a few days' time. I want to go to the town today to get some information from the police." Tridib said, "Very well, I'll take you in my car and come back by 12 noon. Byomkesh shook his head. "No, it will take some time. It will be evening by the time I return. I'll have my lunch and go out." Kumar said, "All right, that's also okay with me. Himanshu, why don't you come with us? We haven't been to the town for a long time." Himanshu said hesitantly, "No, I have some work. I won't be able to go today." Byomkesh said, "No, you don't have to go. Ajit can stay back too. We both will go." He looked at Tridib. There must have been some signal in his eyes, because the latter stopped himself from saying something. At about 11, Byomkesh went out with Kumar Tridib. He told me before going, "Keep your eyes open. Notice everything that happens in my absence." After the car went out of the gate, I felt that on Himanshu's face there was an expression of the sheer joy of freedom. The old suspicion that he somehow was not happy at our arrival and stay in his house began haunting me again. Divan Kaligati was nearby. He was an extremely shrewd man. He might have guessed the tension between us, because he called me to the veranda and began conversing easily about various subjects. Himanshu joined us too. The main topic of our conversation was Byomkesh. I always loved advertising the talents of my friend, so I did that now, quoting many examples. I also hinted that this household was lucky to get his help. Then I said that Harinath is not alive could be discovered so quickly only by a person like Byomkesh. Both were startled. Not alive? I was in a fix. I did not know whether I should have revealed the fact, but Byomkesh had not asked me to keep this a secret. Still, I felt that I should not have blabbered. I controlled myself and knowingly shook my head. Everything will be revealed to you in time. It was 12 noon, so we got up. But though neither of them asked any more questions, I could realize that both were disturbed by the news of Harinath's death. I was thinking of spending the whole afternoon alone, as Himanshu said that he had some important work. But Baby kept me company. She asked me where Byomkesh was, and apologized for not coming earlier, as her cat had given birth to kittens. Then she began letting out many secrets of her family by talking continuously. She suddenly said, "My mother hasn't eaten for 3 days." I asked, "Is she sick?" She shook her head gravely. "No, she had a quarrel with my father." I was considering whether it was civil enough to ask any more questions on this subject, when I noticed a green sedan silently going out of the gate. The driver was Himanshu himself. I could not see whether there was anyone inside the car. Baby said, "That is our new car." I felt that Himanshu's actions were surreptitious. Where did he go? Was there anyone with him? He was trying to hide something from us right from the beginning. Our arrival had put a spoke in his wheel, so he was very anxious, impatient, but could not express it. Did he know something, then, about the disappearance of Harinath? Or was he shielding someone? Why was Anadi Sarkar crying yesterday? He said that he had not committed any crime. What crime? Today Baby said that her parents were having a quarrel. What were they quarreling about? Was Harinath responsible for this quarrel? "Can you draw pictures?" Baby asked. I came back to the present. "Yes," I said absent-mindedly. Baby ran out of the room and came back with an exercise book and a pencil. "Please draw a nice picture for me." The exercise book was Baby's arithmetic book. Her name was written in an adult handwriting on the first page. I asked, "Is this your teacher's handwriting?" "Yes." I was amazed as I turned the pages. The book was filled with difficult sums. There was very little in the child's handwriting. I asked again, "Who has done these sums?" Baby said, "My teacher. He always did sums in my book." It was true. I could not understand why those difficult mathematical problems were worked out in a little child's exercise book. While turning the pages, I noticed that a part of a page was torn. When I observed closely, I found that something had been written on it and then torn, because in the next page the impression of what had been written on top was still there. I tried to read the impression, but could not. Baby was growing restless. "Why are you not drawing pictures for me?" Suddenly I remembered a trick which was very popular when we were in school. I asked Baby, "Do you want to see magic?" Baby was very excited. "Yes, yes." I tore a small piece of paper and blackened it with the pencil. Then I rubbed it on the impression. Just as the negatives of photographs become clear after being washed in chemicals, so too some of the words on the impression became clearer. Om, ring, cling. New moon phase starts at 11:05. The words were illegible and incomplete. The first seemed to be some kind of mantra, but the handwriting surely belonged to Harinath. Baby was not at all satisfied when she saw this magic, so I had to satisfy her by drawing different pictures of different kinds of animals. I tore the paper with the unintelligible writings and kept it with me. Himanshu returned at about 3:30. The car returned silently and entered the garage at the back of the house. After some time, I heard Himanshu's voice asking the bearer to serve tea. Byomkesh returned in the evening. Kumar did not get down from the car as he was feeling feverish. We had another round of tea with Byomkesh. Devanji also joined us. He asked Byomkesh, "What happened?" Byomkesh sipped his tea and said, "Not much. Police think that Harinath is being sheltered in their houses by some tenants." Devanji said, "You don't think so?" Byomkesh answered, "No, I think otherwise." "You think Harinath is not alive?" Byomkesh was surprised. "How did you know?" "Oh, Ajit must have told you." "Yes, that's what I think, but I may be wrong." No one said anything for some time. I felt very uneasy. Byomkesh did not seem annoyed with me, but one can never make out his feelings from his face. Maybe he would take me to task when we were alone. Kaligati said suddenly, "I think you are wrong. Harinath is alive." Byomkesh looked at him and said, "Did you get to know anything?" Kaligati said, "Not exactly, but I'm sure he's hiding in that forest." Byomkesh was startled. "In this cold? In the forest?" "Yes. There is a little hut in the forest called the Sadhu's hut. He hides there at night to save himself from wild animals." Byomkesh asked, Did you get any positive proof?" "No, but I'm nearly sure he is there." Byomkesh said nothing. While getting ready for bed, Byomkesh asked me, "Have you announced about our discovery of the quicksand to the world also?" "No, no. About Harinath, I just mentioned that—" "Yes, yes." He sat on a chair. I said defensively, "You didn't tell me not to tell anyone about your suspicion about Harinath not being alive. So you regarded it as your solemn duty to broadcast it to the world. Anyway, what did you do this afternoon?" I was relieved to find that he was not so angry. I told him all that had happened in the afternoon. I showed him that piece of paper which I tore from Baby's exercise book. Byomkesh looked at the paper, but did not show much interest. "I know all this. I can even complete the second line in this paper. The new moon phase will begin at 11:45 p.m. Even Harinath had seen the almanac." Byomkesh only smiled when he heard about Himanshu's furtive activities in the afternoon. I said, "I think he's trying to hide something from us. I feel he wasn't very happy to have us as guests either." Byomkesh thumped my back and said, "You are quite right. You can't imagine what a perfect gentleman he is. He is really incomparable. That's why we should solve this case." I was astounded. Byomkesh continued saying, "Anadi Sharkar has a daughter called Radha. I saw her today." I looked at Byomkesh foolishly. Byomkesh said, "She is a pretty girl of 20, but a widow. We punish people if they give in to the vagaries of youth. Sometimes the punishment is too severe, especially in the case of women. We don't consider the fact that human beings are susceptible to temptations, but we pass a judgment. Even a court of law has a thing called grave and sudden provocation. But society makes no excuses for a sinner. But the person who finds a chink in the stone wall of harsh rules of the society to show is really a great man." I have never heard Byomkesh giving a lecture on the laws of the society. How Anadi Sarkar's daughter had unplugged his fountain of emotions was indeed a mystery to me. I stared at him in surprise. Byomkesh was quiet for some time, and then heaved a great sigh. Another strange thing which I have noticed is that in these cases women are the bitterest enemies of their own sex. Neither of us spoke for some time. Byomkesh then said, "It's late. Let us go to sleep. I can't understand how this case will end. I have understood everything, but it's difficult to catch the culprit. We must set a trap, Ajit. Do you understand? We must set a trap." I was irritated. "If you want to say something, please speak clearly, or don't speak at all." "You didn't understand anything?" "No." "Strange. Whatever doubts I had vanished after I went to the town today. I can see it as clearly as a film." "So? What did you do in the town?" Byomkesh said, "Only two things. I saw Anadi Sarkar's daughter at the station. I was hiding there for that. Then I got some documents in the registry office." "Were you so late because of that?" "Yes. It took a lot of time to have a look at the documents in the office. Many permissions had to be taken." "Then?" "Then we came back." Byomkesh slipped inside his quilt. I knew that he was not going to tell me anything more. Very annoyed, I too tried to go to sleep. As I was dozing off, we heard a soft knock on our door. Byomkesh opened the door, and to our surprise, we saw Kaligati standing at our door, wrapped in a black blanket. He said, "Come with me. I want to show you something. Ajit Babu, you also come along with us." Byomkesh wore his coat, and I wrapped a heavy shawl around myself and followed him. We went out of the house towards the gate and then into Kaligati's house. There did not seem to be anyone in the house. We climbed onto the terrace by a staircase connecting the ground floor with the first floor. He took us to one side of the terrace and pointed towards the direction of the forest. "Can you see anything?" We looked through the darkness of the night and noticed a light burning far away. Byomkesh said, "A light is burning. Could be a fire also. Where is it burning?" Kaligati said, "It is burning in the hut in the forest." "Oh, the hut in which the sadhu stayed? Has he come back?" Byomkesh mocked. "No, I think it is Harinath." "Oh!" Byomkesh seemed startled. "Yes, you did mention it this evening. But what is he doing there?" "Probably he is unable to bear the cold, so he has lit a fire." Maybe. Byomkesh said after much thought. "If he is alive, it is possible that he is there." Kaligati said, "Byomkesh, he is alive. He is hiding from the police. Who will go into that hut at this time of the night but him?" "That's true." Byomkesh seemed thoughtful. Then he said, "Whoever it is, we must find out. Ajit, are you ready to go there?" I shivered. "Now?" Kaligati said, "Please consider everything carefully. If you can catch him, then you must go now. It is very dark, but you cannot go with a light. He will run away if he sees a light. Again, it is impossible to reach there without making a noise. Think well before you decide anything." We talked about what to do. Then we decided that it was not safe to go there that night, because if he became suspicious, he would never come back to that hut again. Byomkesh said, "Devanji is correct. We should not go tonight. I have a plan. If the culprit is not alerted, he will come here again tomorrow. Tomorrow Ajit and I will go and hide in that hut. Then as soon as he comes—" Kaligati said, "That's not a bad plan. We will think about it. This much for today." We came back to our room. Devanji saw us to our room. He asked Byomkesh, "You don't believe in sadhus?" Byomkesh said vehemently, "I think they are all cheats. That's my experience." Kaligati's eyes dimmed with unexpressed anger. He gave a faint, forced smile and said, "All right, go to bed. Don't tell Himanshu about all this now." Byomkesh said, "Yes, it is best not to tell him anything now." Kaligati left the room. We again went to bed. Byomkesh said, "The old Brahmin is furious with me." I said, "Yes, the way he glared at you before leaving, I think so too. Why did you have to say anything against sadhus when you know it's his belief in them?" Byomkesh said, "I badly want him to be angry with me." I could not understand what he meant by that. It was unlike Byomkesh to speak against someone's religious belief. But why did he do this today? I said, "What do you mean? What was the point in hurting the old man?" "You will understand tomorrow. Go to sleep now." He turned on his side. Byomkesh whiled away his time till noon the next day. Himanshu seemed happy and relieved for some reason. He chatted and entertained us with many stories about his hunting experiences. He seemed to have forgotten that we were his guests to solve some serious mystery. He did not bring up that topic even once. After our afternoon tea, Byomkesh took Kaligati aside and whispered to him, "We will proceed according to last night's plan. All right?" Kaligati looked worried. "Have you given it a serious thought?" Byomkesh said, "I think we should go to the hut tonight. We have to solve this mystery once and for all. The moon will set at about 10 at night. Ajit and I will go there before that and wait for the culprit to come and catch him as soon as he walks in." Kaligati said, "But if he does not come?" Byomkesh said, "Then I'll assume that my earlier guess was correct. Harinath is dead." Kaligati thought for some time and said, "But I think you should go once before to the hut, now, to see where it is. Let's go." Byomkesh said, "All right. If we don't see it in daylight, it will be difficult for us to locate it in the dark." He did not reveal to Kaligati that we had already seen the hut. The three of us reached the hut. Kaligati walked ahead and took us inside. We saw that there was a heap of ashes in the middle of the room. Otherwise, there was no change. Kaligati opened the back door overlooking the stretch of sand. Byomkesh said, "What a lovely open space." I repeated, "Yes, yes." Kaligati said, "You will stay in this room tonight, but I'm a little nervous about it. I have heard people say that a tiger has come to the forest." I said, "So what? We will bring our guns." Kaligati smiled. It will be so dark that you will not be able to see your target. Your guns will be of no use. Anyway, I hope the rumor about the tiger is false. There is no need to bring a gun, but we can't be too careful, so please be on the alert. In case you hear the roar of a tiger, don't stay inside this room. Come out of this back door, close it, go down onto the sandy area, and stand there. Even if the tiger enters the hut, it will not be able to climb down onto the sand. Byomkesh said happily, "That's a good idea. We should not bother to bring guns. Besides, Ajit has newly learned to use a gun. He will needlessly make a noise, and all our efforts will go to waste." We returned home, but my mind was covered by a mist. In the evening, we were sitting together in Himanshu's armory, when Byomkesh asked, "Himanshu Babu, suppose that a person had killed a simple, harmless, dependent man for his own selfish ends. How should that man be punished?" Himanshu said with a smile, "Death. A tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye." Byomkesh turned to me. "Ajit, what is your opinion?" "I agree with Himanshu Babu." Byomkesh was silent for some time. Then he went to the door and shut it. He came back and said softly, "Tonight Ajit and I are going to hide in the small hut near the forest." Surprised, Himanshu said, "But why?" Byomkesh gave him the reason in brief and said, "But we are feeling nervous to go alone. You have to come along with us." Himanshu said with great enthusiasm, "Of course, I will come with you." Byomkesh said, "But not a soul must know that you are coming. Then all our plans will go haywire. Listen, we will go out at about 9:30 in the night. You will start out of the house at 10, but no one must know. You must not let anyone know that you are even aware of our plans. That is also important for the success of our expedition. And you must take your best rifle with you. We will go without any arms." We got ready to go after the dinner and left the house at exactly 9:30. As soon as we went out of the gate, we heard a voice calling us softly. It was Diwan Kaligati. He was waiting for us. He came near us and said, "Are you going now? I can see that you have not taken any guns with you. Remember what you must do if you should hear the roar of a tiger. Go and stand on the stretch of the sand behind the hut." "Yes, we will remember your instructions." "Good luck. May God be with you." We began walking. Once we reached the hut, Byomkesh took out his torch and looked around the room. Then he sat on the ground and told me to do the same. I sat down and asked, "May I light a cigarette?" "Yes, but the light of the matchstick must not be seen from outside." So we sat smoking quietly. We heard a noise outside after half an hour. Byomkesh said, "Himanshu Babu, come in." Himanshu came in with a rifle. The three of us began our long vigil inside the hut. At about 12:25 a.m., we heard a terrible sound very close by. All the three of us stood up. I had not heard the roar of a hungry wild tiger before, so I trembled with fear. Himanshu said in an undertone, "Tiger!" A slight sound from his direction told us that he was getting ready. The roar had come from the side of the forest, so Himanshu quietly went to the doorless side of the hut. We stood motionless. Himanshu whispered to us, "I can't see a thing. It's very dark." Byomkesh whispered back, "Shoot at the sound. You're an expert at it." Himanshu went a few steps out of the hut. Just at that time, the earth trembled with a wild roar. It was very near us, maybe within 50 yards from where we stood. Before the echo of the roar receded, Himanshu fired from his rifle. We heard the thud of something heavy falling at a distance. Himanshu said, "It has fallen, Byomkesh Babu. Take out your torch." Byomkesh walked ahead of us with his torch. Himanshu said, "Don't go too near it. If it is only wounded, it would be dangerous." But where was the tiger? At the edge of the forest, something wrapped in a black blanket was lying on the ground. Byomkesh shone the torch on it. Himanshu gave a shocked cry. "What is this? It's Divanji." Divan Kaligat was lying dead on the ground, his last expression revealing all the ugliness which he had so carefully hidden when he was alive. Byomkesh examined him and said, without a trace of remorse, "Dead. If there is something called the next world, then he must have met the man he had murdered, Harinath Chaudhary, the tutor." Byomkesh pushed the account books towards Himanshu. "If you examine these carefully, you will realize why you are running into debts of lakhs of rupees." We were sitting in the drawing room. 2 days had passed after the death of Kaligati. We had retrieved the stolen account books of the last 4 years by breaking open the cupboard in his house. Many other documents were also found there. Himanshu had still not recovered fully from the trauma of the recent incidents. He sat quietly on one side. He said softly, "I still can't understand anything clearly." Byomkesh said sympathetically, "That's understandable. I will unravel the mystery of this story from the bits and pieces of evidence which I have collected over the past few days. But before that, take these registered deeds." "What are these?" said a bewildered Himanshu. Byomkesh said, "These are the registered papers of the deeds of mortgage which you had given to the moneylenders to borrow money. The moneylender sold these deeds to Kaligati, who bought them with your money in his own name. These are the registered papers for those. And here are the receipts of the money which the moneylender received from Kaligati. All the land you were mortgaging was becoming Kaligati's own in this way. He was buying your land with money stolen from you." Himanshu shook his head helplessly. "Kaligati was going to buy your whole estate from you at the end. That was his plan. He would have done it in about 2 years. But the maths crazy tutor spoiled everything for him." I said, "Please start at the very beginning." Byomkesh said, "After Himanshu Babu's father died, Kaligati saw that the new zamindar was quite disinterested in the running of the estate. He got a golden opportunity. He was the one who wrote the account books. There was no one else who checked them. So he started embezzling money with impunity. This went on for some time. His greed began to increase. But then there was a limit to the income and expenditure of an estate. So his theft was becoming limited. Now he began court cases with some of the rich tenants. The expense incurred in these cases was unlimited. This helped to make his theft unlimited too. He became ambitious. He began to dream of becoming the zamindar of Chorabali estate. But you were not aware of anything. Things were getting this way when suddenly Harinath appeared on the scene. He was a simple person who had great respect for you. Kaligati began to initiate him into the worship of goddess Kali. But the problem was that he was not satisfied only with religion. He was crazy about maths. He worked out huge mathematical problems in baby's exercise books. One day, his eyes fell on the huge account books in the cupboards of his room. He began examining the accounts and was amazed at the discrepancies there. He was disturbed. But who was he going to talk to about all this? He hardly used to meet you, and he was a bit frightened of you too. So he did the most normal thing. He confided in Kaligati about all the lapses in the account books. Kaligati was very worried. He decided that Harinath had to be removed, and also the 4 most recent account books of the last 4 years. Now begins the most terrible and cruel part of my story. Harinath had to die, but one could not use weapons against him. So what was Kaligati to do? Kaligati knew the area of the quicksand. Most probably, he too had discovered it as accidentally as we did, because he used to frequent the hut where his guru, the sadhu, had been living for some months. This quicksand was just behind the hut. Kaligati thought out a novel way to get rid of the tutor. He would die, but no one would even know that he was dead. Kaligati would also be able to give a plausible excuse for the disappearance of the account books, while he himself would be beyond suspicion. On the last new moon night, he told Harinath that if he wanted to attain the ultimate spiritual goal, he would have to go to the hut at midnight and chant prayers to Goddess Kali. The tutor wrote the prayer down on baby's exercise book and kept the page with him. When everyone was asleep, Harinath went out of his room. He was going for prayers, so there was no need for him to take his shoes or wear his kurta. In fact, it was so dark that he had to virtually feel his way to the hut, so there was no need to take his spectacles either. Besides, Kaligati must have taken him to the hut. Before coming away, he told Harinath, "If you hear the roar of the tiger, go down by the back door of the hut and stand on the stretch of sand." Harinath started praying. Soon he heard the roar of the tiger, so authentic that even a veteran hunter like Himanshu Babu could not make out the difference. This roar must have been heard by the villagers, so there was a rumor that a tiger was around. Kaligati was a talented person. He could imitate the calls of animals so well that no one could make out the difference. We had heard him imitating a fox for a baby. Hearing a tiger roar, poor Harinath ran down and stood on the stretch of sand, only to be sucked in by the quicksand. A shiver runs down one's spine when one thinks of his terrible, helpless death. Byomkesh continued after a silence. Now Kaligati returned home, removed the account books, and put them in his own cupboard in his house. The next day he proclaimed that Harinath had run away with the account books at the behest of some troublesome tenants. Still, to leave no doubt in anyone's mind, he even stole 6,000 rupees, borrowed from the money-lender to cover the cost of court cases. Himanshu was always careless with his keys, and misplaced them, so this gave a golden opportunity to Kaligati to say that Harinath had stolen the keys of the locker. Then Ajit and I came on the scene. At this time, something else was happening in the house which had no connection with Harinath's disappearance. It was an eternal tragedy of our critical society, a widow falling into the trap of temptation. Anadi Sarkar's widowed daughter Radha had given birth to a stillborn baby. This came to the ears of Himanshu Babu's wife, who thought that Radha had committed the sin of killing a fetus. She came and told Himanshu Babu that this could not be allowed or pardoned in her house. They must be thrown out. Isn't it so, Himanshu Babu? Surprised, Himanshu nodded his head. But a kind person like you were reluctant to do that. You even had an argument with your wife. Then quietly you put the girl in a train and sent her to her aunt in Benares. You drove her to the station yourself to avoid gossip. You even offered to help her out with money. Anadi Sarkar is lucky to have such a generous master in you. This incident got so entangled with the incident of Harinath's disappearance that at one time the whole thing became very complicated. It took me some time to unwind the whole mess. I hid in the station to see Radha, and realized that she had nothing to do with this mystery. I knew then that Kaligati was the murderer. I got a burning proof of the wickedness of the unscrupulous villain when I went through the documents in the registry office. There was no way in which I could catch him, although I was sure of his crime. Kaligati was not worried in the beginning, but when he heard from Ajit that I had suspected that Harinath was dead, he became uneasy. He first tried to convince me that Harinath was alive, and took us to his terrace to show the fire in the hut, which he himself had lighted. I began to pretend that he could be correct, and expressed a wish to catch the culprit red-handed by lying in wait for him in the hut. I was laying a trap for Kaligati, but he thought that he was laying a trap for us. He knew that if Harinath did not come to the hut, which Kaligati knew more than anyone else that he would not, I would again start my investigations. So he decided to send us to the same fate as Harinath's. I too was waiting for this chance. He was a fanatic. He hated my jeering words about sadhus, and his determination to kill me grew stronger in his mind. He took us to the hut that evening and gave us the same advice which he had given Harinath. The rest you know. No one spoke for some time. Then Himanshu said, "Why did you ask me to go to the hut with my rifle? You knew I would aim at the unseen tiger just by hearing the roar." Byomkesh smiled slightly. "Don't ask me that question. Don't be upset. Death was his only punishment. Instead of hanging in the gallows, he died in your hands. He is lucky. Remember, you had said that night, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You were only an instrument to mete out justice." A car stopped at the porch of the house. Kumar Tridib got down with an anxious face and a newspaper in his hand. He entered the room and said, "What's all this? Kaligati was shot dead? I was down with influenza, so I could not come here the last few days. I saw this in the papers and came hashing. Byomkesh, what has happened?" Byomkesh read aloud the news item in the paper. The zamindar of Chorabali estate in North Bengal had gone out to hunt with a few friends. He fired after hearing the roars of a tiger, but unfortunately his shot hit his old Diwan Kaligati Bhattacharji. It is anyone's guess what the old Diwan was doing in the forest so late at night. Himanshu Babu, the zamindar, is heartbroken at this incident. The police have completely exonerated Himanshu Babu, as the investigation showed that he had taken ample care and was totally in his senses when this incident occurred. Byomkesh got up and told Kumar, "Let's go back to your estate now. We have finished the work here. I will relate to you the story of the sad demise of Kaligati while driving to your house."